Okay, well, Thomas graced AV5 last year, and getting Thomas to come to AV5 wasn't the easiest task because I had invited Thomas, but then he decided that maybe he was going to withdraw a little bit from the scene. But fortunately, he had a change of heart, and he regaled us at AV5. And he has said, as I think I said yesterday, that his presence at AV6 may well be his last appearance on the public stage. I don't think so. Anyway, we'll see how that sort of pans out. But Thomas is, without any shadow of doubt, a very insightful individual. The work he's done on exposing how psychopaths establish themselves in society, how society creates psychopaths. Thomas and I did an episode of Humanity versus Insanity where we walked through the behaviors that were being promoted in programs like The Apprentice, where we're actually sort of putting out this meme that the model is based upon the principle of how to be a complete bastard. And interestingly, that was the show that I think got amongst the most hits on YouTube. Well, that's the one that YouTube allowed the number of hits up there. But Thomas also, to his credit, some time ago, called out a certain individual by the name of Russell Brand. Yeah. So who here followed Russell Brand's advice and voted for Labour? I'm guessing that's not too many, or you're not going to admit it. Well, Thomas made the observation that Russell Brand was being put out by the establishment to lure people into the Labour vote. And I think that we would have to acknowledge that he was pretty much spot on that. So, very insightful man. If you want him to remain not necessarily ever present, but you want him to maintain his public presence as opposed to just from behind the keyboard on Facebook, then you can probably buy him a beer or two in the bar afterwards. But for the next hour and a quarter, we're going to enjoy the insights of Mr. Thomas Sheridan.
First of all, can you hear me okay? Yeah. You can? Okay. It's fantastic to be back here. Thank you very much, Ian, for that. Ian has been amazing to me over the years. I think we first met about 4 or 5 years ago, and Ian has always been very supportive of me and my work, and one of the people who really helped me get out there. And so, I'm very happy to help him any way I can this way, and it's great to be here. And it's been a fantastic lineup this weekend. Everyone seems happy with the speaker, so I'm really honored to be part of this journey. It's really what this all is. Now, speaking of a journey, when I was coming over here, the only flight I could get was a 5 a.m. flight out of Dublin Airport that was full of bodybuilders. And I was the only person on the plane that wasn't a male or female bodybuilder because of a convention on in the NEC. And so it was just so I was the only one that, I was the only male. I was surrounded by guys with small penises and lesbians, so it was like being a politician. And there's guys are walking up and down the plane aisle like this, all buffed up, and if you take those steroids, your willy's like that size. So it's like all dressed up and nowhere to go. And so that was an experience of itself, and the last few months have been just like this. It's just been like I've been living in a kind of a Simpsons or a South Park episode. It's been like non-stop, but then probably my whole life is like this, So welcome to this Sunday sermon. That's what I feel like here behind this. The last time I think I had anything to do with the Catholic Church, I think I was 14 in secondary school, and they sent this trendy priest around. You ever meet these Irish trendy priests? They're like incredibly patronizing. At that time, he was a big Stevie Wonder fan. He had a motorcycle, and he was he went to go to Australia surfing. Very patronising. I know we were trying to get into contact with the youth of Ireland so that the church can address their needs, that kind of a thing. And they gave us a form, and it said on the form, as a young person, what would you want the modern church to do to help you? And I said, stop trying to fuck me. And so that was the end of that. But I won't bother you with my religious experiences. Oh, I never remember this. I was actually a druid sex god for one night, a wizard. No, I'm serious. This is true. I just remember when I was much younger, I was traveling across America, and I was somewhere, Sedona. Have you ever been to Sedona? It's a beautiful kind of New Age place. It's like Glastonbury with like dental hygiene, but someone put me up in this place to stay. I was like 19, 20, and he said, "Oh, it's a New Age, a Wiccan commune." And I went to this ranch, and it was all like these rich Jewish girls who were also Wiccans. And they were all incredibly beautiful. They all looked like Arwen from Lord of the Rings. And I walked in there. I was Mr. So un-New Age at this, I kind of, not really, but at that point, but I see all these women, and it was an instant conversion. Before, where I grew up in the north side of Dublin, sacred geometry is trying to get home from the pub without being hit by a bus. But so they say to me, "Are you a member of the pagan community?" And I look around. Yes. My name is Marilyn Goldberg, and so I had a spectacular night of being rejected by every single one of them, and I'm not going to get this presentation on. I had it by every single one of them, and at the end of the night, it was just me and this girl outside. It was perfect, the desert, the cactus, the fire. It was bang on. It was perfect, And I just asked her, "What's your name?" And she goes, "My name is Montana Sunrise." And I burst out laughing. And I said, "You're joking." And she goes, "No, that's my real name. My real name's Montana Sunrise." And I was like, "Well, how would you get a beautiful name like that?" And she goes, and I was like this. And she goes, "Well, I was conceived while my parents made love in Montana under the Rockies while the sun rose." And I said, "Well, it's a good thing we don't have that tradition on the north side of Dublin, or my name would be Fisborough Shopping Centre." So that was the end of me that night. Oh yeah, I have a presentation to do, sorry. Anyway, yeah, it's great to be back. Now, I don't even know what I was going to talk about. Oh yeah. The last 4 or 5 years, I wrote 2 books on psychopaths that one of them did very well for me. And I wanted to express to people that you can solve the problems in this world and address them without having to go down any kind of woo-woo path. You don't have to go down there. And it'll be much easier to explain to people that Tony Blair, looking for the red dot, is a psychopath, than you can say he's like evil or he's, what he is. But it became a great way to explain to people, because I found out this is one subject that everyone is interested in, other than New Age Wiccan goddesses. It's psychopaths. They say to you, "Oh yeah, you mean like serial killers?" I say, "Yeah, but there's also ones who work in business." And instantly it's like, "Really? Tell me more." It's one of those subjects that it's like a great door opener, to actually get information about all the things we speak about out to people. And so it really took off, and it got me around and got me a name and got me into lots of trouble as well, but which I'll talk about later. But that was it. But there was, I said like earlier on, I don't have this sort of spiritual thing about me. I don't think I've ever had a spiritual experience. Like when people talk about that a moment, I've never had that. Although I've had a very deep connection when I go to places like Avebury and Newgrange, and and places like that, I do feel a tremendous energy. If that's what a spiritual experience is, well then, yeah, I've had it, but I haven't had that kind of transcendental epiphany or kind of rapturous feeling that people have without drugs. But, so, I was in 2012, I was at a new age, not a new age, it was like a spiritual yoga, all these kinds of things in Dublin. It was a big kind of exhibition. And there was this gorgeous looking black guy. He was about 7 feet tall. He was the most handsome man I think I've ever seen in my life. And he had a big smile on his face, and he was one of these African guys who was dressed in really colorful clothes, and he said that. He had that like big smile about him. I went up and spoke to him, and he was like an amazing guy. He was a Nilotic shaman, and the Nilotic are a tribal people that exist in West Africa, Kenya, that part of the world. And he was really funny, and he was nothing like what I expected. He didn't have his head up his arse like a New Age shaman would have. It was very matter-of-fact, funny, happy African dude. You know, it was very kind of, hey, man, that kind of thing. And he says to me, what are you interested in? And I said, psychopaths. I'm very interested in the whole idea of psychopaths. Everything from serial killers down to like white corporate criminals. And he says to me, oh yeah, I know all about them. He goes, that's the demon world trying to enter this world. And up until that point, I never actually thought there could be a spiritual aspect to the idea. I read lots of mythology. I'm a mad Joseph Campbell fan. And I'm a hardcore mythologist, but I never really put the two and two together. And it's like what Dr. Graham was saying today. It seemed to be that humanity, there was two species, not literal. When Dr. Robert Hare called them an intraspecies predator, he was really talking about psychopaths in a metaphorical sense. But lots of books have titles like demons and monsters and that kind of thing in them dealing with psychopaths, and often they're academic texts. They're used as metaphor, but sometimes the allegorical or the mythological language can be actually more useful to you in conveying these ideas, just like they were to our ancestors. And then you start looking through the canon of folklore, and you see that the folklore is full of them, from the Grimm fairy tales. European folklore is full of them. You have the ideas of the Nagas in the Hindu text. You have the Djinn in the Islamic world. I'll be talking about that later on. You have the demons and the fairies. Now, here's the thing. People in Ireland, the fairies, people lived in terror of them. That's a myth. That's a myth that the fairies were these wonderful, lovely things. Irish country people, up until, say, the 1950s, lived in deep terror of the fairies and went to extreme lengths to avoid them. And it was only Walt Disney and Tinkerbell and all this who made the fairies, you know, sweet and charming and sexy and all this kind of thing. They were seen as almost like, they were seen identical to how Islamic people see the Jinn. They were demonic, another kind of consciousness on this planet that lived alongside humans. And so now it's going to be a huge non sequitur here, but stick with me because I'm going somewhere with this. When I was a kid, before I developed pubic hairs, I used to be into electronics. Before that, you know, puberty destroys you. And I was a smart kid, and I used to smash up old broken TVs and radios, and I used to get the magazines like radio magazines and circuit magazines and shortwave magazines, and I used to build quite complex electronic devices. I built a metal detector that worked fantastic when I was about 10. I built a shortwave radio, and I found analog electronics almost magical, and I still do. Analog, man. And I can remember being fascinated by how a resistor stops the flow of current and has color bands on it. That was I was going into a magical world. You could read a resistor by the color bands on it. How a capacitor stores up a charge and then discharges it in a pulse. And it's all it is a rolled up piece of paper. It's essentially a wand when you think about it, firing a charge. And if you look at analog schematics, a schematic is the drawings of when the components and how the components are drawn. They look just like magical sigils, which are used in ritual magic. And this thing had a very powerful effect on me. But especially things like crystals. This is why I was very open to the idea of crystals having power from an early age, because it was amazing to me that I could get a piece of quartz crystal out of the ground that would vibrate at a certain rate of cycles, and that would allow me to tune in radio stations from England by just passing a current through it. So this was just, so to me, it was a world of absolute magic, right? Absolute magic. And it still is analog and that's the analog signal up there. This is the frequency or the amplitude of the wave, the top and the bottom. That could be a frequency of sound, it could be a pulse of electricity. And the length is the time. That's how cycles are measured. It's a very smooth, natural thing. Very smooth. Then I went to Dublin City College, a technical college. It was called Kevin Street at the time. And I got into the electronic engineering. I was going to be an electronic engineer. That was like I thought that was my dream. But I was also interested in music more and more, so I wanted to really play in a band. And it destroyed my love of electronics, because everything was mathematics and physics, and there was very little lab work. And I was very uncomfortable. I had a very difficult time fitting into college. I was very shy. I had a very thick working class north side accent in a very kind of snooty south side college. And so I felt it was a very difficult experience for me, college. There's no happy days in that. I dropped out after a year, but what the final straw for me was the bottom line. There was I think it had 8 pins on it. It was made by ITT. It was called the International Telephone and Telegraph, American company. And what it was called the 555 integrated processor. It was the very first microchip that you could commercially buy yourself and use in a hobby magazine or in a hobby shop. And the 555 processor was basically what they called logic circuits, where things were switched on or switched off. And that's basically what the earliest commercially available microprocessors were. They were a series of switches. They were essentially electronic relays. A relay before that was an electronic switch that was also magical too. It had a magnet inside it. You put a current through it, and it caused it to close. There's so much stuff like that in analog electronics. How the cathode ray tube generates 70,000 volts at the back of a TV and fires a phosphorescent coating with electrons at high speed to generate a television image. You know, we forget what magic is. That's what magic is. Now, this 555 processor was a series of switches, so it gave you options. Switch on, switch on, switch off, switch on. And what it was the beginning of digital. A pulse. Now, the bottom line, that's a digital switch. That's a digital signal in its purest form, a 1 and a 0. 1 is the square above the line. 0 is below the line or level on the line. And then from that, you can construct a waveform like that by constantly building up the 1s and 0s. You compress, and you make data, and data can become sound or anything else you want. It was not natural anymore. And looking back on it now, I realized that digital electronics was not natural. And that's why I'm very wary of these ideas of people saying we are a biological computer. We're not. We're much closer to a biochemical radio. We're much closer to that. We operate in frequencies and cycles just like an old-fashioned analog circuit. We do not have switches going on and off. That's a transhumanist idea that's been imposed on us. Now, yet there are DNA switches and sequences that switch on and off, but the impetus for that is a biochemical electrical signal generated in your brain, which is analog. So we're analog, we're not digital, but they're trying to make us digital. And now let's look at the waveform here in terms of the aesthetic. The analog wave, it's a graceful thing. It's like nature. It flows like the wind. It flows like an ocean current. It flows like the moon going around the earth and the earth going around. It's a gentle cycle. It's a pleasant thing. The bottom one is a box. There's nothing in nature like that. Nothing at all. There's nothing in nature that operates like a box except one thing, a psychopath. If you want to see, stripped down to the basic form, a normal person's cognitive awareness and a psychopath's cognitive awareness, the analog comparison to the digital signal is probably the best you could get in a kind of an electronic, geeky kind of allegory. Now, what you see in the bottom one is a purity. There is no gray area in a digital signal. It's a switch on and a switch off. It's absolute. The top wave is relative. Now, it's graceful, it moves. When it changes, it goes up and down. And this is why old records sound better, that were analog recorded. This is why they sound better, because no matter how much they compress the digital signal, there are still jumps in frequencies and tone that our incredible human ears and human perception is able to pick up on. A lot of people are saying, and they're quite rightly so, that I'm being affected by electrosmog. Well, we've always had electrosmog. Since about 1900, the earth has been filled with an enormous amount of radio waves, but it wasn't until digital transmission came along that it started to affect people's health, because it's not natural. Where those kind of, I can stick a receiver on the end of a disc and point it into space, and I'll get the top signal. I'll never get the bottom one. If I get the bottom one, I'll probably be afraid we're going to be inundated by aliens. But it's never happened. You'll get the top, the space is full of them. The universe is full of analog signals. The earth is full of them. So when there was a transition into early days of radio, there was not the same disruption of human physiology that happened with the arrival of the digital switching system. And this is where the problem lies. Not the electrosmog itself, because we can handle that. It's in the digital aspect of that. Now, on an allegorical term, you don't want, a person is not going to have a happy life unless they're a psychopath or they're in a highly dogmatic structure, like a cult or the military, or highly institutionalized as a prison inmate or in a psychiatric hospital. They'd only be happy with the bottom one. The top one is how we live our lives. Now, to give you an example of this, like you think of the bottom one, let's just say, imagine there's the top one is the laser? Yeah. Imagine there's a ray of light coming from here, right, to both of these. Now, imagine these were like mountains, right? And these were mountains. If a ray of light came and hit this one, okay, what would happen is you would have a dark shadow here down to there, but then you would have a fall-off shadow that would become gray and fade back to light as it goes up this trough here, from up and out of this trough. So you would have a gradual darkness into light, and you would also have the effects of reflected light hitting this peak here. Now, I'm talking in allegorical terms now, and hitting this wave here. So you would never have absolute darkness with light hitting this surface. With light hit this surface, you would have a black triangle there, dead. And in that black triangle is where the demons reside, if there's such a thing as a demon. It's in the absolute. Now, when I say a demon, I'm talking allegory. Your demons could be your behavior. It could be a repressed trauma. It could be anything, but it's in there. Now, that is trauma. This is the blues, because you can pull yourself out of this. And if you don't, you'll be pulled naturally out of it. That's why I'm a firm believer in embracing the darkness and embracing your shadow. I've always been interested in dark subjects and dark things, and I think because Carl Jung says we do not create enlightenment by imagining beings of light. We create it by making the darkness conscious. And that means going into yourself or into the society or into an organization or a group and confronting the shadow, and then shining the light on the shadow. This is what all the indigenous shamans, that's what a shaman does when he goes off into his other world. And so this would be that. Now, you can, that, people say, like, why do the Irish always seem to be having a great time when they're happy and they've had such a horrible history? Easy culture. Music, dancing, having a crack, having a joke. That kept us alive. Black American people, the blues. Why do you think they call it the blues? Because tremendous art, or Jewish humor from the Borscht Belt, tremendous art can be purged out and creativity out of darkness, because what you're doing is you're sort of healing yourself at the soul cognitive level, at the psyche. And so this is what black humor can get you out of this too. I'm sure if those of you who've served in the forces in combat zones will always say that the lads are always having a laugh, even in the midst of battle. They're taking the piss out of each other. They tell me that all the time. That's black humor. It keeps you from going nuts. I use humor all the time because the subjects I've had to look into in the last 2 years, the psychopath stuff, and some of the letters I've gotten by people, I'd probably be out of my head by now. But it keeps me sane. The black one down here is absolute, it's pure, and this is why you would have regimented ideas. And this is what the European Union meant by that infamous poster from the 80s of the blockheads. I don't know if you've seen it, but they showed Europeans marching into the Tower of Babel, and then they come out the other side as blockheads. They want robots, because a robot doesn't go on strike, a robot doesn't get pissed off, a robot doesn't do this, that, and the other. And that's what this is what Pippa spoke about, the smart system. This is what it is. Blockheads all lined up in a row, all know their little place, and everybody just does exactly what they want. This is poison. This is a poison of the human consciousness. And this is why they're dehumanizing us every year. This is why cognitive functioning is definitely decaying in society. I have a friend who runs a chip shop up in Yorkshire, and he's been up there for 30-odd years. And he told me that the kids in the past were much more rebellious, but they had tremendous intuitive behavior. Like, they could figure things out. They could fix things. The kids coming to the shop now, they're much more docile, but you have to show them 10 times over how to wash a dish. They're useless. They're useless because the education system has a lot to do with this. Now, trauma also creates this kind of behavior. There's a thing in clinical psychology called gaslighting. It's what psychopaths use to break you down. What they do is they present you with a false view of reality. And so the only way you can deal with this false view of reality is by abiding by it and becoming part of it. And then you actually society is gaslighted. This is why Americans thought that Iraq was behind 9/11. They were gaslighted by Fox and all those other bastards into that. So there you go. So okay, so that's what I want to be. I want to have days where I'm happy, and I want to have days where it's okay, and then I want to have shit days and miserable days, and I want to be brokenhearted. I want people to break my heart, because I know that this thing here is evolution for everyone. Because you asked anyone who's had a terrible problem, a breakup in a marriage, or a financial problem, that there was a point where they were pulling themselves out of it, where they unleashed and untapped things inside themselves. This one here, that's the wall in Games of Thrones. That's the ice wall. There it is. There's no way out of that until you get a pulse from the system, a Ritalin tablet, an order, a Prozac, a Xanax, that gets you into it, marching in step. The robots march along. The humans flow and go with the flow in an analog fashion. So that's it. That's where we are, okay? I'm sure everyone in this room is in this one. And remember, if you're in the shit down here, remember, you're in a place that is allowing you to tap into forces inside you didn't have. The psychopath doesn't have that. What the psychopath does is he or she will steal something or rob something or scam someone else. So the psychopath goes along scamming everyone, sudden drop, bang, down into here, right? How does a psychopath get up here? Well, it goes up to there and steals this person and steals money, whatever, robs their job, robs their life. It's a switch on and a switch off. And it's funny because in 2012, my second book, Defeat the Demons, I interviewed a psychopath in a town called Longford in Dublin. And I never want this bastard anywhere near me ever again, because he approached me with his persona switched off. You see, because psychopaths do not have any internal personality structure. You talk to them, they have the sense of emptiness inside them. There's a hollowness. They're like a Russian doll, and inside them are fake personalities. And he approached me with his fake personality switched off, and it was horrible. It was horrible because I now understand that he was taking this, bollocks. He was taking, I don't know how to get back on. He was taking my analog signal and disrupting it. You understand? Like when two people are synced, synchronicities, we hear all these terms, oh, we're just like each other. People who are in love, the heartbeats beat together, so do babies in the wombs, they're synced. These bastards, what they do is they throw you off. And they make it very difficult for you to get back into your flow cycle. Thank you, Matt. So that's it, that's it. I've done all I can do to get this information out there. I've done all I can do about it. But I just said there's ways around it. Like my friend Bjarni there just gave me this box of psychopath collector cards, and on the cover is Jimmy Savile. Now, it's dark, but this is the dark stuff I'm talking about. These are trading cards on serial killer, British nonsense. He's on the cover. Now, a very big part of my journey has been the studies of psychopaths, but also subcultures that spawn out of them, serial killers and cults. Because all cult leaders are all psychopaths, every last one of them. They have to have them in order to keep in power. Now, but the Jimmy Savile, I'm not predicting, I'm telling you he was a serial killer too. He was absolutely involved in at least one of the Yorkshire Ripper murders, the murder of Irene Richardson, a young prostitute, on Soldiers Field in Leeds, the back of his house. One of his girlfriends has come forward and said that he used to drive her. It's in the papers, it's up there, it's on my website, but it's also in the mainstream media now, that he used to drive her around in Yorkshire where all the murders happened and say, he said, I can't talk anymore about this, but I have friends in the police. Now, when Savile was being interviewed in 2008, not long before he died, or 6, or I think it was the Dorset police. It was down south somewhere. And the copper said, he passed a snide remark about this, the Ripper. And the copper said, well, what did you mean by that? And he said, well, I had friends up in the forensic labs up there in Leeds, if you know what I mean. And the Louis Theroux thing, now, Ian said I'm an insightful fella. I am, because I watch and because I learned a lot about psychopaths, reading about serial killers. I also worked on Wall Street as a graphic designer. I was employed by all the main banks there. And I saw these behaviors around me all the time. But we all have this insight. Now, I'm not saying, of course, Russell Brand isn't a psychopath. I'm just saying I understood the game was psychopathic that he was being used for. But you get a skill set that our ancestors had that we don't. That's why you do not get psychopaths in indigenous cultures, because they kill them. They kill them. They will kill them usually as teenagers. They spot it right away, and they'll take them on a hunting party. They'll be doing things like stealing people's other stuff, getting all the women pregnant while there's a hunting party going on, and this kind of thing, and causing danger. And they'll identify them right away, and they'll kill them. They'll take them, drop them off a cliff or something like that. I'm not saying we should do that, but we can develop the skill sets of our indigenous ancestors. Now, that's why I was able to spot those things and other things like that. It's not a detective thing. It's a sort of a combination of understanding how the game plays, because look at that digital wave. It's very predictable. It's always they're very easy to predict, whereas an analog wave can change frequencies and cycles and so on. So if you learn about one, you can learn about all of them. You can read about Ted Bundy and learn anything you need to know about a CEO of a corporation. Now, Ian has asked me to talk about what's going on in Ireland at the moment, and it's absolutely epic what's going on in Ireland. But the water charges. Now, first let me make the point is, Irish people are not averse to paying their water charges. They have no problem with paying for the infrastructure being maintained. That's not what the issue is about. What the issue is about is they're already paying for it through the road tax. The road tax actually had a levy on top of it to pay for water utility systems. So one, we were already paying for it. Two, it was a private company called Irish Water, run by a guy called Dennis O'Brien. This guy, now I have to keep my mouth shut because this guy has lawyers coming out of his ear holes ready to jump on you and sue you. And this guy got the water contract from the last government at a knockdown price, even though Siemens offered the same system for something like 80 million euros less for the annual charge. He got it because he was friends with the politicians. Ireland is a very, very corrupt country. It's incredibly corrupt, but it's old-fashioned corruption. It's not like here where it's a bit more sinister because the UK is a much more powerful country. In Ireland, it's kind of closer to mafia kind of thing. But I'm not saying he's a gangster. I'm just saying we have a very bad history in Ireland of political corruption like that, coupled with these bureaucrats and these oligarchs and all these internationalists like your friend Mr. Sutherland and these people. It's a funny country, Ireland. For such a small country, it seems to have a lot of power in the global system. And it's a lot of them spawn out of top Irish Jesuit schools, where they get a tremendous education in kind of like Minecraft, like in understanding people's minds and things like that. Now, O'Brien owns just about all the mainstream media in Ireland except for RTE, the national stations, our BBC. He owns the biggest talk radio station. He owns a slew of newspapers, both nationals and regionals. He owns a whole bunch of independent radio stations and local radio stations, and even a magazine that I used to love called Ireland's Own, that was just like an old ladies magazine that would have like a People's Friend, just like had stories about the Irish countryside. He even owns that. And why he owns all of them? Because he's able to control information. Now this is what and anyone who doesn't abide by, anyone who suggests anything about him is not above the board, he will come down on them with the most expensive lawyers he can hire because he's a billionaire. Now, it's like Italy in the Middle Ages. It's like the Borgias or something like that. That's what people are protesting against. Now, I don't believe in marching and protesting because all it does is it affirms, it validates your leaders. It's saying to them, please rule me better. You know, I'm kind of a moderate anarchist. But they are good for people to meet up and make contacts, and are fantastic for that. And so they go to them for that reason. But don't go there to beg for more from your slave masters. Now, excuse me a second. Ian, do that when you have 5 minutes left, will you? Thanks. So anyway, with the water thing that's going on, something very interesting is happening. There's a group called Right to Water, who are the official protest group. And just by the most amazing synchronicity, the guy who's running that, I had experience with him 10 years ago when he was a trade union leader at Irish Rail. And he ran a group, he had a breakaway trade union called ILDA, the Irish Locomotive Drivers Association. And they had illegal strikes, stopping trains. And it made no sense. I was working in human resources at the time that did a lot of contracts with government and transport companies, so I was well into what was going on. And why they were pulling these strikes make no sense. Brendan Ogle was the leader of just a humble train driver from Athlone in the centre of Ireland. And he had tremendous power. And he was pulling, the strikes were pulling. Now, I'm not saying he deliberately did this, but what I'm saying is he was the greatest asset the property developers ever had, because the primary target of the stoppages on the rail lines was to kill rail freight. That's what mostly happened. When the strike went on, factories and shippers that were using the rail system to transport goods, well, they had no choice but to switch to trucks. And once you go to trucks, the trucking contractors are always going to make you happy. So that traffic is never going to go back to rail, okay? Why did that free up property? The biggest rail yards are all in the Docklands region of Dublin, on the waterfront in Cork, on the waterfront in Waterford City. All the prime locations for real estate property prices and developments. Suddenly, in no time, massive amounts of brownfield land that was obsolete because of a strike, developers got for a song. And this is why I'm very suspicious of trade unions. I don't see them as our friends in many cases. So did he have anything to do with it? I don't know. But did the property developers who caused the crash have any gain from it? They're the only ones who gained from it. Only ones. It caused the collapse of a few industries. Irish Fertilisers in Shelton Abbey in Arklow, County Wicklow closed because of the strike. And and if you want to talk about the environmental aspect of it, lots of freight that was on the railway lines was now congesting the roads. And at a time when the economy was booming, a business that should have been booming, transporting rail freight, was closed down. And suddenly there's all luxury apartments, conference centres and hotels built on these former rail yards. And so he should have been public enemy he was public enemy number one for a while. So the next thing that happens is you think he should just be banished out of the margins. He caused commuter chaos, shutting down rail lines during peak hours and everything like that around Dublin. Where does he end up next? At the head union leader at the electrical supply company, the ESB. How he got that job, I don't know. How he got in there. And he was the trade union leader, getting a good salary, when his name should have been Muck. But yeah, he was put into a company where he could cause even more chaos. Now, he tried a few times to shut down the power grid. But then he vanished for a while. And now he's the leader of this group called Right to Water. And he's the state-sanctioned person they stick the microphone in. Now, always remember that. When you have a protest group, always look for who the mainstream media stick the microphones in their face, because they'll never stick it in our faces, because we're the real insurgents. They'll always go for the one who's the, shall we say, reachable. You know what I'm saying? So that's what's going on. And then the scam, I'm not saying it's a scam, but what they're doing is, and it's a very good case model for whether something like this happens here, suddenly Right to Water are not interested only just in the water charges. They're now a general civil rights organization, social, so they've put the water to the margins in terms of a whole political package of a new lefty party that wasn't needed anyway. And so is it funny business? I don't know. I do know my article on it is the third most read article on my website, and tens of thousands of Irish people have read it. And so a lot of people are suspicious. And I'm hearing from people inside the scene that it's probably they're not comfortable with the way this group is run and who's at the head of it. So there's an example of how, though you can't stop them, you can definitely wreck an agenda, or you can definitely stop something for a while to scrutinize it, you know? And they don't like that. They don't like that. And that's how you learn. So that's why everyone needs to study the psychopath issue. Because you learn how government and business works together, because it's a psychopathic tango. Government, everything in this world is a combination of government and business causing all the problems. Everything we spoke about this weekend. Now, I can't change the world. I can't start an organization. I can't start an organization that's going to say, we're going to take the psychopaths down. I know it's never going to happen. But I can be an almighty pain in the ass to them and educate people through the work I've done. That to me is the insurgency that only I can do. I can't do any more than that. I'm not going to put my life on the line or anything like that. So that's though some people say I have already. But I'm not going to do that. My attitude is just knowledge will do it. Now, I told you I went on this. I've often, been a strong believer in you have to pull yourself out of that pit. You know, you can't be waiting to win the lotto. You have to actually put, intention into that. Speaking of the lotto, an Irish fella goes to Bangkok. He picks up three beautiful Thai girls in a nightclub, and they say to him, if you take us back to your hotel, it'll be like winning the lotto. So he takes the three beautiful Thai girls back to his hotel room, and it was just like winning the lotto. He got 6 balls in a row. But you have to put action into intention, intention to action. Patrick's talk yesterday about the Bundy Ranch was a classic example of that. They didn't play martyrdom. They did not act a martyr. They had a specific plan. They had a specific idea of what they were doing. They were not hysterical. They said, we are confronted with this situation, and we have to pull something from inside of us out and that thing had Waco, Ruby Ridge, Mark 20 all over it. How that thing wasn't a bloodbath. It wasn't a bloodbath because a strong, intelligent, and bonded people kept their focus. And they didn't, and they upped the ante. They got up there waving their guns around, but they all you could tell they all kind of knew it wasn't going to happen. But they did it. They did it. So it's the most powerful government the world has ever known. A farmer took them on and won, right? Now, then you say to yourself, so what can we do? Well, there's lots we can do. And then you look back through history, and then there are cases like the Bundy Ranch that actually involved entire races. And this is one of them. That's a Viking longship. The Vikings are the most degraded and mocked people and culture the world has ever known. When a person thinks of a Viking, the first thing they think of is an alcoholic, rapist, pillager, screaming. And there's a reason for that. They were the very first people, they were the Muslims of the Dark Ages. Why this happened? And that ship you're looking at there was their moment of pulling out of the abyss. Prior to the building of these ships, the Nordic people, the people of Scandinavia, and the Norse, they were farmers. They were just like the Irish and the Anglo-Saxons. They farmed land, they grew crops, and they kept cattle. And they were just an agrarian, Northern European society. But they were still heathens. They worshipped the old gods. They were not Christians and had no desire to do that. What happened was, Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor in the East, after the Saxons surrendered the bloody verdict of Verdun, he killed 5,000 Saxons for not converting to Christianity. He put them to the sword. And the ones that survived told the Norse that they were next. The Scandinavians from the Gulf of Finland all the way across to the western coast of Norway did something quite incredible. They went to the forest of their ancestors. They knocked down logs, and they built the greatest ships the world had ever seen. And it was a classic example of that kind of idea. What they did was, they said, we can't take on the Holy Roman Empire directly. They'll kill us. They'll wipe us out. Look what they did to the Saxons. The Saxons were a much more powerful race. And we're not giving up our Christian or heathen religions. So what they did was, they became an insurgency of the oceans. They became a people that lived at the sea. And they built ships that no one else could catch them. And first thing they did was they sailed from the west coast of Norway. And this happened all over Scandinavia at the same time. This is incredible organization and synchronicity. But I'll explain to you, I hope I have time for this to explain this, but I'll explain to you why they did that. It was because of their religion. Now, they have, in the Nordic pantheon, there's a thing called Ragnarök. It's the end of the world, the final battle where all the gods are killed, Thor, Odin, but the world is rebuilt again. It's not a doomsday scenario, it's a big battle. It's a big battle. And these people would have been culturally conditioned to this idea, and they would have seen Charlemagne as Loki, the sort of like the demonic devil figure of, the wolf, coming to destroy them. And so tapping into their archetypal consciousness, they were able to escape, almost go to their great battle. And the first raid that they had was at the monastery at Lindisfarne in Northumbria. And if you were to ask the people, what was the situation that took place at Lindisfarne? And they'd say, these crazy Vikings showed up, and all these holy monks, and all this kind of thing, were brutally butchered, and they had their stuff taken from them. That's absolute and utter bollocks. That Lindisfarne was a legitimate military target. These monasteries were Christian militarized outposts. The monks were actually heavily trained and heavily armed knights who were basically used by the Roman Empire to control the locals. But they were soft targets for the Vikings to attack and also to build up their economy. And these monks were ready for a fight, and they were defeated. And it was Alcuin, the Anglo-Saxon chronicler, 100 years later, in Charlemagne's court, as it was then, made up this story of the heathen monsters came along. It was the propaganda. What was happening there was, at Lindisfarne, was the exact same thing that's happening in the Middle East when someone attacks a NATO base. I'm not saying war is right or war is wrong, but if someone's in your country and you're being bombed or shot, you're going to form an insurgency and you're going to attack them at their softest spot. It was a classic military engagement, an insurgency. It absolutely terrified the Christian empire in Europe. And the Vikings, rather than a people who were on the run, became a race that was the kings of the sea. And they discovered Canada. They were sailing down the river systems of Russia and trading with Persia. They're still finding Islamic artifacts in Viking graves. These people were so incredible that when the rivers ran out, they used to pick these boats up on their shoulders and carry them and use them as houses and then sleep in them overnight or as defensive positions. These were geniuses. These people could navigate in ways that no one else could until the time of Columbus and the Great Age of Discovery. They could travel. When they first met Native Americans, they traded with them. When Columbus first met them, he killed them. Now, why is that? Because, and again, I know Christians get a hard time from me, and I'm not attacking you for your faith. That's Christianity. That's paganism. And I'll tell you why. Christianity and the Middle Eastern religions, which are not our religions, remember that. We in this room, unless our ancestors came from the Middle East, none of those three Abrahamic religions are ours. They're not. Our ancestors were heathens. The word heathen just means the people of the heart, the heartstone. That's all. And they worship nature and gods. Now, I've no problem with those religions in the Middle East, but these are not our religions. Now, Christianity was the perfect control system for the West because you had one God, one book. And what does that lead to on earth? One ruler, one king, one emperor, one pope, right? So that creates the autocratic, the dogmatic system, whereby in a more pagan system, and I'm not saying you should all start converting and become Marilyn Goldberg, but I'm just saying, consider this. Consider your ancestry. Think back. Your ancestors were not goat herders in the Bronze Age Middle East, getting all freaked out by a woman having her period, or anything like that. They lived on these islands, and they did amazing things, and they were the same as the Anglo-Saxons. The Gaels were the same as the Picts, as the Anglo-Saxons, the Nordics, as the Saxons. Even though they had a different pantheon of gods, if you look comparative mythology across all of them, there's very similar things. Their religion was a religion of psychoanalysis, because if you had an issue that you had to deal with, you drew on the Thor inside you, the Freya. You drew on the archetype inside you. You probably could go back then and they probably didn't even believe that Odin was a real king, or a real god. But to them, it was an aspect of the subconscious you could draw from. And this is powerful, powerful stuff, where you have the monotheistic religions from the Middle East. They're autocratic, they're dogmatic, and there's no gray area. It's black, white, black, white, black, white. I'm God, you're the devil. And that's exactly how Zoroastrianism, the basis of all these Abrahamic religions, came from. It came from the first idea of non-Platonist dualism, where Zoroastrianism came with the idea of there was a God in heaven and there was a wickedness on earth, and that was how the God and the devil came from. Good guys, bad guys. Where this one, if you have, for instance, in the Nordic pantheon, you have Loki. Now, Loki's the psychopath kind of god, but he's useful too as well, because he got Thor's hammer after he had to do that after he cut off his wife's hair. He was forced to do it. They show you that sometimes the bad guys can be helpful to you in a situation. And it's a much more intelligent way of looking at spirituality. It's not enforcing victimhood or oppression on you. Now, this caused, my last post, Walpurgis Night, I wrote about how National Socialism completely corrupted this idea of a pagan revival, which was happening all over Europe. In Ireland, they had the Gaelic revival. Here in England, things were coming back like that as well. You had a folk revival. Morris dancing was coming back. That kind of thing. English folk music was coming back. And so it was all very healthy. In Germany, something went terribly wrong. And it was almost like a corruption of the psyche. And they were so right for so long, and then it made it racist. And so they were trying to invoke, they went from being basically, they were trying to revitalize paganism, but they did it in an autocratic, dogmatic way. So they corrupted it. And the next graphic, I know I don't have much time. The next graphic is a great illustration of this. This is an image of Odin, the chief deity of the Norse religion. But it was created by a group called the Thule Society. The Thule Society were an occult Germanic order who basically believed that German blood was racially pure. And actually, a lot of these kinds of ideas of a pure race, and even Zionism came out of a lot of these kinds of ideas. And even there's even elements of that within Irish culture that somehow we're Irish with better blood. That all spawned from this time. Now, this is how they portrayed Odin. That is not Odin. That's Jehovah. That's who that is. He's sitting on a throne. He's got the classic biblical light thing behind him in religious art. He's ready for war, and he's got the Jerry and Frecky, the two wolves at his feet, but they actually look more like Dobermans. They don't look like wolves. And he's got Hugin and Murin, the two ravens that he uses to bring him messages from the world of men. And that's what I love about Odin. He's a god who isn't perfect. But they made him look like Jehovah. Let me show you how Odin was well, this is not an actual picture of him, but this is how he was depicted in the Eddas. That's Odin. He was like a person. He made mistakes. He didn't know it all. He sacrificed one of his eyes in order to gain wisdom because he wasn't the all-knowing, all-seeing God. He would have arguments with his wife Freya. She would call him a fool. Could you imagine the God of the Bible having that kind of argument with his wife? He'd kill half the people in the Middle East. And so these gods were much more approachable as archetypes. I want to have a pint with him. I want to run from Jehovah. I don't know if he's worse Satan or him. You just read Deuteronomy or Leviticus, and these are bloodthirsty, the books of the Israelites. And it's not just them, it was the whole Middle East. It was like that. I'm not going to say just them. But this guy wasn't like that. He came down to earth to protect people. He took an interest in the welfare of men. He cared for them. He rewarded them when they did well. You could have a beer with him. That's what's fantastic about, you could have a beer with Thor. And that was a great film. It was a stupid Hollywood film, the original that was made, Thor, a few years ago. That was Hollywood rubbish. But they got it right, that's how he's portrayed in the Eddas. He's a god you can have a pint with. Isn't that wonderful? Wouldn't you want a god that you could have a pint with? Wouldn't you want a god you could go fishing with? You know that kind of thing? Wouldn't you want that? He's a mate. And he looks after you and he cares about you. And he knows that the day is going to come of Ragnarök when he and his sons are going to die for you. He's willing to die for humanity, so humanity in its darkest hour can be reborn again. He's not going to judge, poison, or pollute humanity. He is going to protect us at the end of the world. And from him, survivors will rebuild the world anew. And that's what caused that mentality is what the Nordic people did when the Scandinavian Vikings did. They went to the seas to rebuild the world anew. And they did. They did. They became the greatest trading maritime nation the world had ever seen. And it came directly out of being attacked. Directly out of being under great danger. And it's a lot like on a grand historical level what Patrick was saying happened in the Bundy Ranch. And didn't you mention, Patrick's here, you mentioned fate. They were able to use fate, and that fate isn't necessarily always a Christianity. It's faith in the outcome that this will work out. Sometimes you need fate. And fate is the thing that gets you, to away from FATE. It gives, fate can get you away from that fate. And so that's basically it. Now, the reason why I'm not doing this anymore is because I don't want to be here talking in years about the same things to come. I'm still writing books, and if there's a book launch, I'll do that. But basically, I've said all I can say. I've also wanted to go into some very dark places. I'm involved with a cult. That's not an issue with a cult, and also a serial killer who I've been getting threats and things like that. I've been told that to bury me. So there's issues like that, personal safety. I'm not a young chap anymore. I'm not as good at fighting as I used to be. I'm running away, and so there's issues with that, and there's also other issues too. But basically, the time of talk is over. What we have been hearing here this weekend is Ragnarök, the end of the world. Vaccines, poisoning of children, smog, you name it, everything, right? So what do? Oh, we're all shagged, we're finished. No, we have to be we have to go inside to us, to that lower base of that analog line, and get in there. And as individuals, and not waiting for a Messiah to come along and save you. That's another aspect of Christianity I don't like, because it takes the power away from mankind, and that's where that comes from. And so then that's why you want cult leaders and gurus. You don't need them. You're your own guru. And so I'm going to build a longship. Now, I'm not saying European folklore is better or anything like that. I mean, I love the poetry of Rumi. I've read comprehensively on Indian mythology. I've had the odd curry, but I'm not going to say I'm not doing it from a point of view it's better. That works for me. My ancestors were Gaelics and they were Vikings. So that's worked for me. That's great for me. You may be something else. And so you pull in that. So my attitude is now, I want to do that. I want to have an adventure. I want to build my own longship in my life and do this. And I want you all to join me. So thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Well, whatever Thomas thinks. Fate and all that. I think Thomas has got a lot more to contribute. I'm sure he's going to build his longship, and I'd love to go sailing with you. Thanks for if you do decide to take a break, thanks for everything you've done, Thomas, because you have definitely made a very significant contribution in helping people to understand some of the crap that's going on around them and helping them to find pathways to get out of it. So thanks very much for that.